All right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started here. Similar to our first referendum meeting, this meeting is also being streamed live on Zoom. And we will have a recording of the meeting after the fact that will be posted on our website. So everything that we say this evening will be captured by the mics. So just want to make everyone aware of that. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Tonight will look similar to our first meeting, as we're going to be taking some time to walk through our flip book of key facts. We found that to be really helpful for people just to be able to have a comprehensive look of the referendum. We'll also have an opportunity for questions that may come up along the way, or when we wrap up the meeting as well. So I'm going to kick us off, and then each one of us up here, as well as some of our board members, will be chiming in. We found it helpful just to go around and do some quick introductions, just so we know who's all in the room. So Dave Carl, Superintendent.
Al Stefan, Village of Fredonia, and Chair of Finance, Buildings, and Grounds Committee.
Suzanne Miller, School Board.
Josh McDaniel, Director of Business Services.
For the table here.
John Long, Fredonia resident, parent of graduates from Ozaukee.
Dan Large, School Board member and parent also of 5 graduates of Ozaukee.
Kevin Klaus, School Board member, graduate of 5 kids through the school system here.
Just wanted to see.
John Kepke, resident of the town of Saukville.
Wally Phil, resident of Village of Fredonia, 1965.
Kelly Sheik, I have 1 graduate and 1 7th grader.
Jennifer Clark, School Board member. I have 2 kids that graduated.
Chris Clark, village resident, graduated 3 kids from the district.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. So first wanted to just mention or remind everyone, we have a district website that has a referendum page. All the information we're talking about tonight is also right there. Have it up on the screen. There is a tab at the top of our district website that says Fall 2024 Referendum. The flip book that we're going to be walking through tonight is there. The mailer that has been sent out, as well as the final mailer that will be arriving to all district residents, will be posted here. We have a variety of frequently asked questions listed, so please be sure to check that out. Direct people there if they have additional questions that are still hanging out there. It's likely that those might be listed here as well. So I just wanted to show you that resource. So with that, I'm going to kick us off as a part of our flip book. One of the things we've been talking about is just a quick high-level overview of the referendum. Each one of these details we're going to be getting into in further detail as we talk through the flip book this evening. So on the opening page and the opening slide, we just highlight why is a referendum necessary, specific to how funding works here in the state of Wisconsin. And we're going to talk tonight about revenue limits and the fact that our question on the ballot talks about exceeding the revenue limits and how important it is that we are clearly communicating what that means. Because for a lot of people, when they hear exceeding a revenue limit, that doesn't sound like something maybe they want to support. And so it is important that we talk about that tonight. If you have been paying attention at all, you know there are many school districts coming forward with referendums. Just one example of that, there's over 300 of the 421 school districts who have already passed an operational referendum. And many more that are on the ballot right now as we speak for November. And so clearly there is a need. And when we talk about the idea of exceeding a revenue limit, it's a reflection of funding within the state. We used to talk about that in the light of saying the system is broken. We've really shifted that to speak about that in a way that says maybe the system is actually working how it was intended. And that is, if you need those funds for operations, you go to your community to ask for that support, keeping those funds local and here and impacting the kids here in our community. And so something important to discuss. So we have another section that we'll be going through just around what has changed with this referendum, specifically how the money is going to be spent, and then the specific tax impact as well. So taking the first section is Josh, and he's going to highlight the area of how schools are funded.
Just a question, out of that 300, that's over like 30 years. Because it was since 1992. How many of those 300 are duplicates? Do you know?
None of those districts.
None of those.
None of those are?
None of those.
So many of those districts have asked every 4 years to renew theirs,
Right.
or some of them have
So
asked
those are not
for,
duplicates, they're.
right.
Okay,
And some of those have asked for a recurring referendum, which we're asking for a non-recurring referendum. We'll get into that, but that's similar to like what Milwaukee Public School District just passed. So you pass a dollar amount and that stays on the levy year, is available to the school forever, where we're only asking for a specific amount for 4 years.
no, I understand, but
Yeah.
on an average, 10 a year. Because since 92, there's been 300.
Well, it's more than that, because right currently this year in 2024, between spring elections and.
No, but I'm
fall
saying over an
elections-
average.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, this year, right alone.
Well,
and
you can
there's
really
117
average that out
districts.
back to that year, you know, I mean, they started sometime after that.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess to dive in quickly, just kind of how schools are funded. The majority of the revenues that come into a district are through the revenue limit. And the revenue limit is really the maximum amount of between tax levy and state aid that a district can raise. This is calculated quickly between membership, number of students that live within our school district times a set per pupil amount, and that per pupil amount is different for every district. Many districts have the lowest amount in the state, about 50% of them, and that's where Northern Ozaukee falls. So multiplying your membership times the per pupil amount gives you your revenue limit. And if you think of that as a pie, then that pie is really divided by how much the state provides in state aid or equalization aid. And then the rest is then assessed through tax levy to our local community to help fund the schools. Looking at the history of NOSD's budget, these revenue limits were established in 1993 from the state. The calculation hasn't really changed over the last 30 years. So what was implemented 30 years ago is still how our school or our state operates for allowing schools to raise funds. The chart that we have on the screen here, just pull it up a little bit here, is our revenue limit over the last 10 years. And I took an average of those 10 years, and that's what the yellow line represents. Now, included in here are some kind of one-time exemptions. And one thing that we point out at the bottom of this page is voucher payments. So as the voucher program has grown through the state of Wisconsin, any resident that lives in our school district that goes to a private school and meets certain metrics to receive a voucher, that then gets added to the district's tax levy. And then the state takes that payment out or whatever out of our equalization aid payments. So in 2018, there was $40,000 that was added to our revenue limit. What we're projecting for the 24-25 school year is $460,000. So of this dot here, we don't have $400,000 that we're able to utilize for operations for our schools. So really, in the last 10 years, the revenue limit for Northern Ozaukee School District has really been relatively consistent. And think of that as our expenditure needs have grown throughout that time. So the next page really then, this graph represents, if we look 10 years ago, where our expenditure level was, and if we would increase that each year by what inflation is, or CPI, the consumer price index, that would be the yellow line. So if we would have had the same spending level as 10 years ago, we would be at about $14.5 million right now. But based on different adjustments and right sizing that we've done throughout many years and adjusting benefits, we were able to kind of cut costs away. But now we've come to a point where it's hard to continually to tighten the belt or make additional cuts and still provide the programs and services that are needed for the students. So that's why we're coming forward for this operational ask. at the top of this page here is the per pupil amount as part of that revenue limit. So the state has provided some slight increases throughout in 21, 22. That biannual budget actually froze the amount that states could utilize as part of that because they indicated that there was so much in ESSER dollars or COVID relief funds that were provided to schools. They indicated use those funds to help use it for normal budgetary needs. But by doing that, it created a future budgetary deficit because when they did give schools additional funding, they didn't keep up with inflation and didn't provide enough to backfill that hole that created. Last year alone, Northern Ozaukee had $500,000 of the remaining COVID funds to help balance the budget. And this year, when we started the 24-25 budget process, that was an instant reduction from our balanced budget. So we're starting $500,000 in the hole before even looking at raises, benefit changes, costs of utilities going up, and everything else.
Josh, you said that earlier about this revenue limit per pupil, that's different based on the school districts. Do you have about a range? I mean, ours is what, 11,419 this year? And you said we'd fall in.
Yeah, so that's what we are this year. Last year, I know it was 11,000, and I want to say the average across the state was like 11,900, but it ranged from 11,000 to 18 or $20,000 for some.
So some schools could be as high as 15,000 per pupil is what their limit is versus ours. And this all came because of a worksheet where we fall in based on a bunch of things.
And a lot of those stem all the way back from 1993 because all schools didn't start at the same point. They all were based on where their spending levels were and how it got calculated. So if a district was running very lean or had that, they were kind of behind the eight ball, or
they got locked to that.
Yeah, compared to somebody else that had maybe extra positions and had maybe their budget padded with different staffing areas. They got to retain those and keep those throughout because that was already built in from that base level of what these limits were set off of.
So the next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the district's long-term vision. It really is centered around growth. That includes growth in our overall student enrollment, our student count, as well as growth within the communities that make up the Northern Ozaukee School District. Our current student enrollment is at 720 students, and that represents the highest number we've had in the district since 2018. Which is just awesome to see that growth within our school. This also ties into open enrollment in and open enrollment out within our district. That number for a long time, we've been talking about just the gap that's there. I can see in the graph that you're looking at here, back in 2015-16, our open enrollment out number was around the 200 number. With less than 100 open enrolling in, actually less than 90 open enrolling in. It was a pretty dismal picture. The reputation of the district at that point was not great. You had families choosing to go elsewhere, and it's a competitive environment. And so we have spent a lot of time as a district, and I think it's really a credit to our community and to our staff and to the families that are here. That people have seen what's happening and say, I want to be a part of that. The number of conversations we've had with families who have heard something good about the district, word of mouth, is always amazing to see. As we take families on tours, one of the questions we ask is, hey, how'd you hear about us? Why are you considering coming to Northern Ozaukee School District? When families open enroll into the district, they're asked the question, why are you considering Northern Ozaukee School District as your choice of schools? Same thing if a family open enrolls out. We ask that same question, why are you choosing to open enroll out? And people are very honest with those responses. And it gives us some data to look at as to the reasons why and how we can continue to improve. And so just two very exciting trends for our district, both the overall increase that we've seen in enrollment in a time where we haven't seen a significant amount of housing development. And still we're seeing that growth, as well as the trends of seeing more students open enrolling into our district.
I think it's important, important to point out, a lot of people don't think of the school districts in terms of competition, but there's definitely competition now among districts to retain students, bring in new students, and I think one of the reasons for this referendum again is to keep the trend going, keep everything going the right way. We're doing good things, and the numbers show it. But competition's it's a real thing now.
Do you do marketing?
We do, yeah. So more and more we see that one of the best options is to do that online, right? And be able to look at that side of it versus what used to be advertisements in the paper. And we found that to be helpful and effective. Given our location, probably the best way is word of mouth, and families that choose to come here and share that information with others is one of the best testaments to it.
And don't you think that, part of the reason for the success is not only having a quality facility, which a lot of people like, but I'd say a lot of our success comes from building a great staff, a great team.
For sure.
And I think that's what parents really value in the very end. And if you look at our budget, 2/3 of our budget is salary and benefits. So if you want to compete in a competitive world where teachers can move around a lot,
absolutely,
you have to try to make sure that you keep the quality people in the building.
Yeah.
You could have the nicest building in the world. If you don't have quality people in it, you don't really have a whole lot.
Absolutely.
I always thought that the opportunities for kids to participate in extracurriculars was so much better at Ozaukee. They can make teams, they can do stuff, where I went to Homestead and it was just useless as far as if you weren't that good at stuff. And that's the best thing I thought it was for my kids, that they could do stuff.
That's another great point. I think a lot of times people talk about how many different programs do you offer, or how many AP classes do you have? And oftentimes we forget to highlight the fact that there are so many opportunities within those programs and sports and participation in the play or a musical, right? You can actually be a contributing member of that. So that's a great point.
Well, and to answer that question, we offer a lot of AP.
We do.
And we have great opportunities for our students.
Right. So the other piece to this is really about the long-term vision of growth within our communities as well. So some years back, we started meeting our board with the Village of Fredonia board. Some of you in here were on that at the time as well. We just recently met with them again, just for some joint meetings to talk about how do we continue to see growth within our communities, businesses and housing development. And so those partnerships are critically important when you look at districts that are growing and people wanting to move into a community. It really is about having not just a great school, but a great community where people want to live, where people want to move into a safe community where there's opportunities. And so that's something that we've prioritized. Within our graph, we've just shown just what some of the projections would be if we saw some modest housing growth resulting in 15 additional students each year. We just talked about the growth that we've had the last couple of years within our student enrollment. If some of those trends would continue, what that would mean for us for the long haul. And so you can see even where we're at right now, we're anticipating kind of a steadying out of our enrollment, which was at one point looking like it was declining. We've now not only really been able to stabilize that, but with some additional housing growth within our communities, we could see some sizable increases in our overall student enrollment as well. And then we're on to Suzanne.
So just gonna address the tools that we have for balancing our budget or raising funds. So there's two types of referendums that a school can have. It's a capital referendum and the operational referendum. Capital is for things like buildings and structures, etc. And the operational referendum is just what it says. It's for operating the school itself. Additionally, under operational referendums, there's two types. That Josh mentioned a little earlier. There's the recurring, which allows the school to ask for that funding, and then it goes on in perpetuity as long as they want it to. And then there's the kind that we're looking at, which is the non-recurring, which means it has a set period of time, in this case, a 4-year period of time. And then if additional funds are needed, the school board has to come back and ask for those additional funds again.
Suzanne, I think another thing is the difference in that capital is that it's a long-term, usually with debt associated with
Yeah,
it.
that's
The operational is no debt. It's invested annually as the money is collected.
Yeah, that's a good call out. And sorry, I didn't mention that, but you're right. So the capital referendum, as Dan mentioned, is debt that we're paying interest on. Or the operational referendum is we bring it in and we use it that year. This Dave already talked to a little bit, but just as a reminder, it shows a map of the individual school districts, 421 in the state, and those 301 individual school districts that have asked and passed an operational referendum. And I didn't know if you knew this offhand. I thought you were about to say it. Do you know how many are asking again? Or how many districts are asking this?
I forget the specific one in fall. I know throughout spring and fall elections, there are 117 unique school districts throughout the state asking for an operational referendum. I want to say in spring there were 62 of them, and I want to say about 50% of them failed. And almost all of those school districts, like Northern Ozaukee, is now coming again in November. So when I say 117, Northern Ozaukee is only being counted once because I'm saying unique school districts is part of that. So there's quite a few, and Northern Ozaukee was the first to bring forward in Ozaukee County. Again, this is our third tribe, but Mequon-Thiensville is asking now in November as well.
Well, I think it comes back to what Dave mentioned earlier, and you're probably going to drill down on it more, but the system looks to be set up to utilize this. I mean, that over time, districts need to exceed the revenue limit formula. And it speaks volumes right there to say that 2/3 of the schools are currently exceeding the revenue limit. And the benefit of, you said earlier, using local money, not sending it to Madison, hoping a certain amount comes back after filling out a worksheet. It comes right to the district.
Now I know there's $4 billion on referendums between capital and operational this election cycle, statewide.
So what's the breakdown between like the recurring, non-recurring? Do you have any idea?
Not off the top of my head. I know on DPI's website there is an Excel sheet or whatever that breaks down exactly what district is asking and what type they're asking for, if it's capital, referendum, or a capital or an operational. And then when it is an operational, is it the recurring type or is it the non-recurring type?
But I mean, do most people ask for a recurring or non-recurring?
The majority ask for a non-recurring. Maybe a third or less than a third ask for recurring.
Okay.
And the reason, tell them why we thought we'd be responsible for a non-recurring.
Yeah, I mean, 4 years, we want to be held accountable. We want to stick to our word, tell the taxpayers exactly what we're going to do, operate the district wisely. And if we need to come back after 4 years and ask for another one, and we have hopefully the taxpayers' approval and we're held accountable.
It's also about the same time that the capital, if you continue on the same
Correct.
path, would be paid off.
Correct. And if the state funding formula changes by some miracle,
that would be a miracle.
Well, yeah, and who's to say it's
our enrollment
And
jumps
or growth,
radically,
or
who knows, but
and or some growth, between the two or whatever that may be.
so we certainly thought it was responsible to put a sunset on it and be accountable. And that was a unanimous decision within the board.
Right. Ooh, there we go. All right. So how the money will be spent, If we're allowed to reallocate the funds out of our prepayment of debt, the district plans to hire 3 additional teachers for some large OES class sizes. 2nd grade and 4th grade are approaching two sections, right? Approaching 30 students per classroom. And after right sizing a few years ago and actually cutting positions to tighten everything up to balance our budgets, now we're finding ourselves in a different sort of problem where we actually have to hire additional educators and teachers and keep our class sizes small, because that's kind of what we want to be known for, individual attention
And Hal, I know you said problem, but I know you didn't mean problem, because that's great.
No,
right?
yeah. I mean,
As our classes grow and we can hire more teachers, that's a success story.
right. Not a problem, a good problem. Another challenge that we weren't really expecting, like so many things come our way and we have to deal with it. So that's 27.3%, $300,000 for additional staffing, roughly estimated. Then the district will basically use the additional 18.2 and 54.5%, which is $800,000 to fill basically budget holes. Take any part of the budget, take $800,000 and stick it in there, and that'll account for that. I mean, targeted would be retaining and attracting that new staff if needed, but it all pretty much plays together. So what has changed with this referendum? We decided this time, even though we feel it's an absolute need, we removed the track maintenance and we removed the maintenance shed, or new maintenance building from this referendum. So that's the one change. So we took out $2.4 million. So you'll see that in the overall ask and in the question from last time.
I guess I'll just enhance that or whatever. We took out the costs that we had anticipated or built in, but we were also able to reduce the total amount of the ask because our enrollment increased 2 years, which was better than projections. So now that we knew that additional information, we adjusted the amount that we were asking for them over the 4 years based on updated calculations of that revenue limit for future years.
Yeah, I was getting to that.
So we asked 1.7 each year for 4 years. And now we're asking 1.1.
And the other thing I think you should talk about a little bit that we talked at length about at the board, we worded the question as up to.
Right.
So if we don't need it all, we wouldn't take it all. It's not guaranteeing that we're gonna take that much every year. Probably gonna have the needs for it, but we said up to, because if we don't need it, we won't take it.
What would you do with the rest of the money then?
We wouldn't levy it.
You wouldn't levy it. It wouldn't be on your tax bill.
Just wouldn't take it that year.
But I mean, this is already out of in the formula, the 8 point, whatever it is, 30.
Yeah, so every year at the annual meeting, when we set the levy, if 1 year we said, hey, we've got to prove the last 4 years that we can take 1.1, but this year we only need 1, or we only need 700. At the levy annual meeting, we would only set it to collect 700 that year, even though it allowed us to go up to 1.1, doesn't mean that
I thought you said you were gonna piggyback that for something else.
it allows us to. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if we needed to, if that's what we felt we're gonna do, yeah, we would take it and piggy bank it for something else if we need to. But we don't have to, is the point.
Human nature kind of says that you probably would.
I guess all I wanted to
There's-
say is the
there's- yeah.
conversation was had.
Up to, yes.
Because-
No, understand,
And
understand.
it remains to be had.
I would almost, I don't want to turn that into a debate, but I mean, human nature says that. However, we also elect the school board as representatives to be responsible folks. So if we don't like those decisions, well, then we vote for that irresponsible decision. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's
absolutely.
that's our power.
For sure.
Yep.
The other question I just wanted to touch on too, Hal, I was kind of waiting here for a minute. I know it's been asked many times, is so you have increasing enrollment, you have more kids, right? Why don't you use that funding to pay for these new teachers? Well, I can answer my own question that I'm putting out there, but or Josh, if you want to do it, that's fine too. But when you have those kids come into the district, your revenue limit is calculated. Part of that is calculated at a 3-year average. So then you don't get, like, if you had 24 more students come into your district, you don't get the cost of those 24 students. You know,
Until the
that
third,
amount
fourth year of the-
times that.
Right.
Of the
you-
referendum.
yeah, you're only getting a part of it the first year and then a small part of it the second year. And as long as you keep on that trend, you'll eventually get the full cost of those over that 3-year average, but it doesn't happen right away the first year. So, and that can be very confusing, you know,
Absolutely.
if you don't,
Correct.
it's a lot of information to soak up. And I've had people ask me that more than
Mhm.
once. And that's part of the reason, you know, you couldn't fully fund those 3 teachers with those students because it's an average over 3 years on a trend that has to continue in the same
Right.
direction.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
The only difference, right, is if there's an open enrollment in family, which those are funded on a per day basis. So those students that open enroll into the district, we get that funding immediately, that portion of the funding. It isn't the full amount.
But you don't get the full amount. You're
Exactly.
only getting somewhere around the amount
Correct.
of 2/3, about a third of the money stays in their home district.
Exactly. Yep. So about 2/3 funding on those students.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so this year, instead of the $11,400, it's 8962 or something, I think, or whatever.
For an
That-
open
that
enrollment kid.
follows an open enrollment student or whatever.
Yep.
And then if there's special education, then it's 13,000.
But you're only getting reimbursed for about 30% of the special ed needs.
Maybe you can explain, I thought that the actual budget deficit was like 800,000 for this year. So why wouldn't you just ask for 800,000 as opposed to $1 million?
Because over 4 years, it's gonna grow. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I
you
mean,
should-
why don't you just say 800 million?
Because we thought it'd be too confusing to see
We
this
can't,
ladder.
some districts do that.
Yeah.
We could do that. We talked about, should we do that? And it makes the sentence longer and longer. Cause you have to exceed the revenue limit by this much for this year and this much by this year and this much for this year. And then people get confused as to what's happening.
yeah, and it came back to that's our next slide. Good lead in, right? We talked about simple. It's as if you've been here
It's like
before.
you've been here.
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
been here once or twice this morning.
Yes, you have. So it was really about simplification of that, and we took, that average over the 4 years, and that need comes out to the same at the end of 4 years, but it's just a way to be able to ask that really clearly and simply, and versus trying to stretch that out and making that question even longer. We talked about this too. It's a long, fairly complicated question. It talks about exceeding the revenue limit. It adds in these pieces about non-recurring purposes. Really, our district and all districts are guided by some statutory requirements around what needs to be in the question. And so if we could change that in ways, we would. But that's how we're required to ask the question. Additionally, Dan already spoke to this too, highlighting the fact that we're asking for this $1.1 million annually each year for the course of 4 years, but it's an up to amount. Again, changes that could happen. Student growth was mentioned. Changes to the funding formula. If those things would happen, the board has the authority to say we're not going to levy that full amount. And each year that is looked at. We have our annual meeting, which just happened Monday night. And we talk about the budget, we set the levy and the mill rate, and those discussions are had as to what do we want that to look like. So it's important that everyone understands that's one of the board's key responsibilities every year. That's looked at and set by the board.
Why is it the maintenance expenses? I thought this was operational. Referendum was.
So within, Hal talked earlier about filling those budget deficits that we have. So it's really looking at our existing budget, and as a part of that, we build in funds for maintenance related items. So we have ongoing day-to-day maintenance of the schools. That's a part of that as well. So we just want to make sure we fully captured that within the question.
And I
It's
think
not the maintenance building.
Correct.
which
John,
we-
you asked that.
Maintenance related.
You asked that same question last time you were.
Yeah, well.
Questioning the question.
I think the maintenance part of it, not to put in you too much, is part of the 54.5% that was on
Right.
here,
Right.
as opposed to the other two, which tend to be more
Right.
staff related.
And really, what option we have to add to the question is kind of, this is your standard question, what's highlighted there, and where
basically provide a little bit additional explanation after that. I guess the only other things are really, we talked about, we asked for one amount per year for 4 years. If not, you could spell each amount and have it like a ladder, and then the question gets long. And then it really comes down to here for non-recurring purposes. This is the type of operational referendum, either a non-recurring or recurring. So recurring meaning it goes on forever, non-recurring, you're listing the specific amount of years. Most districts go 3 to 4 years, some ask for 5 or 6 years out. I guess those are kind of really the options that a school board has to bring forward an operational question.
Oh, is you're on that, Josh, tell them why we did it 4 year, I mean, because of the biannual budget, we want to be able to.
Yeah, so us asking for 4 years, it allows us to know at least 1 year of the biannual budget to know what set amounts we're gonna receive per pupil. So then when it comes to expire, we'll be in the first year of the biannual budget and we can reassess, and we know 1 year, and then we're only forecasting 3 years. As opposed to when we first originally came, we didn't know what the next 2 biannual budgets were, and we were really just kind of forecasting or whatever all 4 years. So we're trying to make the best educated estimates or whatever to be able to bring that forward to the community when we come forward for an ask.
You may be getting to this later on slides, but I was under the impression that the referendum a few years ago, you're paying that money back quicker, is that correct?
The next slide.
Next slide.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
and I'll be quiet.
Nice segue.
Yes.
So John's are rushing.
Yeah. So looking at the tax impact of this operational referendum, the school board plans to keep the school portion of the tax bills the same over the next 4 years. If the referendum is approved, this is possible by reducing early debt payments. So in the past, yes, in the yellow, we have made additional debt payments to be able to pay off those loans a little bit quicker. So by proving the 1.1, we're able to reduce what we're asking for the debt levy and use it for operational purposes. Many times people have come and asked, well, why can't you just use the levy that you've already had and use it for operational purposes? The state is very specific in its statutes for what we're able to levy for, and we can assess a debt levy to help cover any debt payments, the scheduled, and if we want to make additional payments, but we can't utilize those funds for operational purposes without having an operational referendum and the voters and community approving exceed that revenue limit to be able to use it for operational purposes.
So that's the big point you need to make.
Right.
We've been trying.
Taxes won't go up as far as the school portion.
That's correct.
Village, I'm sorry about that.
Right, and as we're projecting that or whatever, we just approved on Monday night our total tax levy of $7.5 million. And we had to approve 2 budgets, and both of them had a levy of 7.5 million. Again, holding taxes the same, and we're projecting we're able to hold it at that exact same level for the next 4 years. And the difference between those is really just how much additional debt payment is made. If the referendum is not successful and it's in the current kind of makeup of what the school is, we would have a larger additional debt payment. If the referendum passes, we would have a small additional debt payment, and then we'd be able to take 1.1 million and increase this blue bar here or whatever to be able to use it for operational purposes. So when we brought forward our deficit, we have a 765, or our budget, we brought forward a $765,000 deficit this year. And if it's unsuccessful, we're going to have to utilize our fund balance, which is going to eat away about 1/3 of our reserves as a school. If it passes, then we're able to offset that and continue to go forward.
I'd like to speak just a little bit to the prepayments that we've been making. So when it came back to 2018, when we needed to ask for capital referendum and the building was in pretty rough shape, we had roofs leaking everywhere and windows from the original building.
People never argue about building.
You're right. It passed by 64%. It was great support. And we had forecasted at that time to the taxpayers as we went out and talked about that referendum on how many dollars we were going to assess in a mill rate based on the one referendum from 20 years old that was going to be paid off. And if we add a couple cents to that old payment, we can get this new building. And at the time we had general contractors come through and walk through and estimate what we needed, and we looked around, and I mean, there's a lot of things that could go on a long list. I mean, the whole kitchen was outdated, you know, which we decided to put a new kitchen in instead of staying where we were, and we had the auditorium and so on. Well, we came up with a list that was about $21 million worth. And we surveyed the community, and the community said they weren't willing to support $21 million because our mill rate would have went to a certain number and a levy would have went to a certain number. So we brought that down. We made a lot of cuts, and we brought that down to 15. Actually, it was $14.95 million. And and it passed with great support. We were very happy. The community saw the need for it. Well, then we went to bid and got hard bids. And unfortunately, our cut down list that went from 21 down to 15 was $2.5 million over budget. So we had to make more cuts. So now from the list that we thought we needed, we were substantially lower. But I think a lot of people would agree, we got a lot for our money. We got very involved. I give administration a lot of credit. I mean, we were at every meeting, every building meeting, and with the contractors, and we got a lot for our money. Community stepped up, people volunteered, blah, blah, blah. And then after the dust settled, we had great interest rates, better than we forecasted. And we saw that we didn't have to levy as much as we needed to make the minimum payment. But we as a committee sat down and talked about saying, well, if we make the minimum payment, this loan gets paid off in 20 years. In 20 years, we're going to have buckets hanging from the ceiling again. We're going to have all these problems that we had when we were up against the wall then. And said, well, why don't we give some back instead of what we said we were going to collect, but not go all the way to the minimum. And that's a decision we made. And that decision was discussed every year at the annual meeting. And that allowed us to prepay down the loan. Now, I think of all the years that I've been here, I think there was 1 year, it was last year, we had one nay vote from our board. Otherwise, it was always unanimous to do that, which we felt was good fiscally responsible. Because of doing that, I think John mentioned it earlier, we forecast we save $2.5 million of interest on that loan. And we forecast that that loan will be paid off at the same time this operational referendum sunsets in 4 years. So we could be 4 years from now, we could be a debt-free, or we will be a debt-free school district at the rate we're going. Debt-free, which Josh don't have the exact number, but he said it probably puts us in a 10% class in the state of Wisconsin. Very, very few school districts are debt-free. And will we continue to need an operational referendum if the formula doesn't change? Probably, but that's not debt.
There's no debt.
That would be invested annually. I mean, we've got so much to celebrate, I think, if people really understand our whole financial picture. We're doing well.
But you also are, even with this program, you still are having some additional debt payments.
Absolutely. Yeah, we still are, if we take the 1.1 and move it into operations, we still are going to continue to pay down. That's what's going to allow us in our forecast to have that capital paid off in the next 4
It'll
years.
just be less of the debt payment if the referendum passes. There'll be a little bit left that'll go to early debt payments. And then the rest would be for operations.
So approximately how much?
We would not collect any more than we've been collecting.
You're wondering, what was your question?
If you do get the 1.1 to the operational, how much additional are you paying in additional debt payments?
Annually, like every year.
Yeah.
Josh, you know what that is?
Yeah, I guess I don't know off the top of my head without looking at my spreadsheets with numbers.
Oh,
But you're the numbers guy. you got
100,000?
somewhere.
Yeah, I mean,
500,000?
500,000, 700,000, I think,
Oh,
somewhere in
okay.
there.
Enough to have it paid off in 4 years, which is big. I think we'll cut that loan down to a 10, 11-year loan. That was a 20-year loan. And $2.5 million of savings, which is more than 2 years of this operational money, is what we saved in interest.
And I
But you're
think
right, we should have T-shirts made that say your school portion of your taxes will not be changing if you vote yes. I mean,
Right.
that really is that.
But I think the other thing too, that we didn't really talk about a whole lot was the money that we have in fund balance where we would have to go get the $800,000 deficit. There was a point that our school district, not that many years ago, back in, 2010, 2011, where we didn't have any money in there. And that money is used to pay your bills in between tax payments. So when we're getting, those 4 payments a year, and I think the last payment of the year usually is the biggest one. So most of our money is kind of held towards the very end.
Mhm.
We need that money in that bank, or we got to go to the local bank and borrow it. And then we have to pay interest, which then adds to your debt again. And that's what we were doing. And one of our big goals was to try to get more money into that fund balance. And for the last couple of years now, we haven't borrowed, but we are using money that's in that fund balance that's earmarked for, we're putting money away for roofs. little, at least some money, so that when the roof section comes up, hopefully we either have some or all to do a roof section.
But
You know,
that's a
rather than
different fund,
paying-
though.
What's that?
But that's a different fund, that's not your general fund.
It's all in the general fund, it's just earmarked for that specific.
It's in our
Duty.
fund balance, in
In
our
our fund
saving
balance.
account or fund balance restricted for that use.
So.
I think we have the long-term capital projects fund that has some money or whatever for that, but then.
Oh,
there is some-
that's
but there is
different
some
than
in
your
there.
roof fund?
Huh?
That's different than your roof fund? 'Cause-
In the long-term capital projects fund that we talked about in the annual meeting, there is $300,000 that's earmarked for roofs in that fund, and
That's
as we kind of
capital
talk through,
That's
huh?
the capital projects fund,
Yep,
okay,
Fund 46.
Fund 46 or
46.
whatever.
But you can't.
okay. I'm saying
Right.
46.
Right.
So anyway, we're putting money away every year, you know, we're trying to make sure that a lot of times people do these capital referendums 20 years at a time, and then they wait till the next one runs out. And things are falling to pieces, and they're like, well, let's hang buckets in the ceiling for 3 more years to wait till that tax levy falls away so we can put a new one on. And if it would be tough if you ran your business that way, right? You know what I mean? You have to try to figure out how to get money put away for things and then take care of it as the needs arise, rather than waiting until you have just a huge amount that you have to go after.
One last thing on that whole fund balance. Department of Public Instruction suggests that school districts have a, what, 15 to 20% or 20?
They don't give a percent, it's an amount to avoid borrowing or whatever for
Okay.
operations, and that's
So you
really,
could have
most
that.
districts are 15 to 20%. NOSD has a 20% policy,
Yeah.
and we are right at that amount for our total fund balance.
Not, yeah, that's with restricted.
The
included,
village
correct?
operates the same way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, our
But
boards,
remember, the state runs deficits all the time, as does the federal government.
you know,
So they're,
our school board back in like 12 or 13, when they came out of this negative deal where they didn't have enough money to pay back what they owed at the end of the year, they set a policy that the NOSD should have a 20% of a fund balance,
And that-
20% of its.
If I remember right, that was a target because we were so.
We were broke.
Depleted in that.
We didn't have enough to pay back the bank at the end of the year. We were a negative fund balance.
Right.
Yeah. So, and we've scratched and clawed and, you know, got to a fund balance at this point for a lot of different reasons. And it'd be a shame to see that depleted, you know, to fill this operation
Well,
gap.
I'll just say this right now. I mean, kudos to this management team for being fiscally responsible, for getting to that target. Because you can set a policy, but getting to that target is real work. So kudos to you guys.
Thanks. Okay, so we got one more page in our lookbook here, kind of to go through. Just wanted to talk through an example tax bill. A school's tax levy is really allocated based on fair market value or equalized value. Taxes are not spread across based on assessed value, because even in our school district or whatever, the town of Saukville just had a full reassessment last year, but the village of Fredonia and the town of Fredonia's last assessment was like 10 years prior. So that's where,
The village has just occurred.
well, it's occurring this year or whatever. So all these numbers are based on
Okay.
January 1st of the previous year. So when we look at the example here, the fair market value is used or whatever to really determine how the total school tax levy is allocated between all the properties within the district. The school only has the portion to affect the school line of the tax bill. And then the bottom box here really represents any approved referendums from the school district have to be listed out on the bottom. So if the operational referendum is approved, we would have 2 lines on here, one for the capital debt, one for the operational referendum. This is not an amount in addition to the line in the middle here. It really represents what amount of this line it's based on the referendums that were approved. Sorry. I guess the other thing that we list is just kind of reassessments of municipalities and just kind of how that works. So when I look back at the town of Saukville that went through a reassessment last year, a lot of their assessed values got bumped up to what their fair market value was. So in this example here, it's almost bumping that assessed value up by 50%. Everybody got a letter saying, oh my gosh, my taxes are going to go up 50%. That's not the case, because the school taxes are really allocated based on the fair market value, and their assessed value is just jumping up to, let's say in this example, the $410,000 value. When Northern Ozaukee is bringing forward
$7.5 million last year for a total tax levy, and we brought forward the same amount this year, when spread across all properties, tax bills should really stay exactly
School
the
portion.
same, the school portion. It's not a perfect math or whatever related to that, because there's a little adjustment between municipalities, but again, last year, this Northern Ozaukee School District brought forward $7.5 million. This year, again, at the annual meeting, both budgets, we came forward with a $7.5 million, so we should not see a tax increase. I did link in here Ozaukee County's website where you can look up tax bills, and you can look for yourself of just an example of how a reassessment affected the town of Saukville, and you can pick any property and you can see this same stuff go through or whatever.
In that example, didn't it actually go down?
It did. So when you look at this line here or whatever for the school portion in the example bill that I pulled up, their assessed value went up by 49%, and the net tax that they paid went down by 4.4%.
The school portion of the tax.
Yes, correct.
And sometimes people, I believe, for people I've talked to get confused by that too. A lot of people like to really run with what's the mill rate, what's the mill rate? Well, there was some misleading information that was put out, especially on these last couple of referendums, where they're talking about where you fall in the mill rate, and that's really not an accurate representation of where your school is, because I mean, you could have a really high mill rate and you could have really high property values, and then maybe you are on the high end of how the amount that you're levying, but you have a max that you can take dollar amount. So if your community hasn't been reassessed in a long time, and the revenue limit has been creeping up over the years, well, sure, your levy is gonna go up, that mill rate will go up. But if all of a sudden your whole community gets reassessed and the cost of the buildings go way high, well, that mill rate's gonna come way down. So if you have a high assessed value, because you've been just assessed recently, your mill rate may look really low. Right now, every time these assessments get done, because our revenue limit isn't going up by hardly anything, what happens, right? Our mill rate keeps going down, so you could then hang your hat on saying, hey, look at how low our mill rate is, but really you're collecting the same amount of dollars, you're levying the same.
It's actually lower than what you have in the example here, you said, right? The other
Yeah.
night, we're lower than the.
Yeah, so again, this example here is assuming that equalized value is not changing, or property values haven't changed. They did go up like 5% in our district. So with us asking the same amount, our new mill rate for 2024 is gonna be, I think, 796 is what I calculated it out to be. But again, prior to knowing those numbers, because Wisconsin Department of Revenue just released them a couple weeks ago, we just assumed for simplicity or whatever, equalized value is gonna stay the same. And this again really just represents, we plan on asking that same total tax levy amount or whatever for the next 4 years. And based on our projection, we're able to do that.
And if you're gonna do that, the equalized value keeps going up,
Yeah.
the mill rate's gonna keep going down, right? But you're still collecting the same from the taxpayer, and so that doesn't mean that you're doing better just because the mill rate's lower. It means you're collecting the exact same.
Could you explain what I know you had gone through, and I thought it was a good explanation about the credit for the school tax levy credit
Yep.
on there.
So I don't have it in this presentation.
I
have
know.
it in the annual meeting, but really to come up to that $8.35, it's taking the net tax amount for 2013 and you add the school levy credit, that's right here, $703 in this example. And then you divide that by the fair market value, and that's how you come up with the $8.35 or whatever the school's district's mill rate was for that.
And that
for that tax year.
703, you don't get.
So the school gets it or whatever through, I
Oh,
wanna say like county settlements and stuff or
Oh,
whatever it
okay.
comes, but it's not a direct,
right.
assessment or whatever on the
Right.
individual
To the
property tax.
to the property
Yeah,
owner, it comes from the state.
yeah.
Because I'm sure some people look at it and go, well, that's not even.
Right. Yes, nowhere on your tax bill does it list the $8.35.
And then the bottom, there's two amounts as far as, and it says 2033. So if you pay it off early, then it'll go away.
It'll be gone. Well before,
Correct.
we know already it's well before 2033.
Well, not, honestly.
So I haven't adjusted that, or
No.
we've adjusted that as we made debt defeasance payments or whatever,
Right.
we've settled up or whatever.
Right.
So when it's actually paid off and processed, then we've adjusted that accordingly.
I think that's a pretty valid point. for
Yep.
people to know.
Yep.
And another, there were people online that were saying, well, our property values, you know, in the village of Fredonia, some of us went up 20 or 30%. So they automatically think they're gonna pay 20 or 30% more in tax. And obviously, if that was the case, then you wouldn't need a referendum, you know? And I think it's just hard for people to understand that just because your assessed value is going up, doesn't mean that your tax is gonna go up by that same percent.
Well, keep in mind,
Because
school
if that were the
tax,
case, school tax.
school tax, we can't
School
talk
tax.
about what other.
No, I know, school tax,
But because we
Because-
have a revenue limit,
yeah, exactly.
Well, John, the village has to operate on somewhat of a revenue limit as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they do, but it's based on net new
Right.
construction. So if they get new buildings within their municipality, they're able to add that new value and add additional tax levy on it. A school district is based on the number of students that are enrolling. So in our circumstance, if the number were to decline, we actually could go backwards and receive less money, where as a municipality, once you set that threshold, I don't think you can actually go below that.
If you go backwards, the state, you're at that level now for the next year.
Sure.
So you always
That would
want to
just be
keep,
like a decline in value or something.
you always want to keep this debt out there. Once a project is paid off, you don't want to, you need a new project to keep your levels the same for a state.
that's how the system is built.
Yeah.
Like it or don't like it,
Mhm.
that's how it's built.
So we're coming up on 1 hour. This brings us to the end of our presentation. I know there's been quite a few questions along the way. It's been a really good discussion. Is there any other questions in the room that anyone had, or anything that anyone in the room would like to add?
You know, Dave, I would, and that would just be the couple things that I've, in talking to people that I found that they found interesting and didn't know. And I hope they got it out of the presentation, and that's the revenue limit. You know, that they're set by a revenue limit by a given formula. And that revenue limit changes only based on enrollment or if the formula from the state changes. We know our increases have gone up, like our health insurance a couple of years ago went up $200,000+, but our revenue limit didn't change. So we had to operate within that revenue limit. And I think that when they've heard that, they've been kind of surprised and weren't aware of that kind of thing. And that's why we're asking now to exceed the revenue limit. And then the other thing is that I think everybody I talked to was pleasantly surprised that we've been fiscally responsible and prepaying that loan down to save the interest that we have, which allows us now to make a shift of those funds and not collect any more from our taxpayers and allow us to do this. So, I mean, those are two things that I hope people got out of the presentation, because that's what I found talking to people. They were, you know, and I think Chris gave a kudos to management for that. So.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions before we close?
I think you did a real good job in presenting this, and people should understand they're not gonna pay anything more on the school portion of their taxes.
I guess
That's very
I do
important.
have a financial question. It's probably to Josh. It's just my understanding. So you talk a lot about, say, the $11,000 as the revenue limit calculation. You know, I understand that's different if, you know, choice in or choice out or what have you.
Yep.
But explain the equalization aid is per pupil as well, right? So that's
So it's equalization aid is determined, the state gives a big bucket of money, and then they look at every school district's like aidable expense from the prior year. And then it's divvied up based on how much property value there is per student living in that district. And then it gets real complex or whatever, because some are positively aided and some are negatively aided. So Northern Ozaukee, the more money we spend, once we meet a threshold, then we start losing some of that state aid.
isn't that also based on like property value?
It is
Like,
part of property value, and I could show you a chart or whatever where kind of each district falls in different buckets or whatever as part of that. So Northern Ozaukee or whatever, when I look back at the chart, some years were like a 60-40 split where 60% is tax levy, 40% is state aid. This year it came in close to 50%. So it's 50-50 almost what's covered our revenue limit of equalization aid and state aid. But again, depending on every school district's expenditures and how we fall in that formula is how it's then allocated.
So then if you compare that equalization aid that NOSD gets and you compare that to other school districts around, like it's not a comparable number. So you've got your revenue limit
Right.
of 11,000. You already talked about that there's other school districts that have a revenue limit, and that's the basis of this discussion, right?
Right.
But go back to the equalization aid calculation. So if you compare per pupil aid for a larger school district, okay, McGuan-Thiensville, right? What's their per pupil aid compared to NOSD compared to, say, Random Lake?
So McGuan-Thiensville is kind of one of those more anomalies, I feel like, in our state, because they have such large property values down there.
I guess that's,
So then- so then-
get those.
So then because of that or whatever, they receive very little equalization aid, so a
Right.
majority of their revenue limit is covered by tax levy.
Right.
You flip the script and I wanna say Beloit or Janesville or something is almost 100% through equalization aid and very little tax levy or whatever, again, based on property value per member or whatever. So that's where they're trying to equalize, I think, throughout of kind of how it is. I want to say around here, there are ranges between us, Random Lake, Oosburg, and Cedar Grove and Port Washington.
So a lot of people like to compare mill rates. What I'm trying to get at
Yeah,
is the
that's not-
comparison of the equalization aid and I don't want to say fairness or unfairness or just a comparison. People really tend to look at what's the mill rate when they're comparing.
Right.
And to Kevin's point, like when I looked at it, I'm like going, I don't know if that really tells me like it doesn't tell me the story.
Right.
But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to really understand like what is that equalization aid fairness? And do we feel like we're on the fair side of that? Do we feel we're on the unfair side? I mean, what's the school board's position on whether or not you feel that is a fair relative comparison? How do you, like when you guys are sitting around, maybe not in a formal basis,
Right.
I'll put you on the spot, but
Yeah.
I mean, do you complain about it or do you think it's fair?
You know, from year to year, I feel like last year we were the lowest around the area or whatever, just how we fell into formulas or whatever. But also we're strategically trying to make decisions and try to move forward on certain projects, knowing that, hey, how do we maximize that formula based on a long-term approach or whatever? So when we're trying to look at it, right? So I mean,
So you don't want to answer the question, I get it.
Well-
Maybe someone else. All right, so do we feel biased? Do we feel fair? Do we feel unbiased? I mean,
I do.
I don't know if there's anything you can do about it.
I complain about it. I
Okay.
complain about it.
Do about it.
Two comparable districts.
Complain
is
to
there anything that you can provide?
well, complain to your legislators,
Well,
Okay,
we did.
which we've done.
I guess that's where I was.
We
going.
invited them to a meeting.
Because,
They've
like,
been to our meeting.
Neighboring school districts, some of them receive a decent amount more money than we do. So we have, our taxpayers have to pick up
Yeah,
more of
I
that.
mean, because when you look at
And-
that pie chart, you have to make it up from the other.
But it's based on their formula and how many, per pupil on what their, how much.
But
their
I
property
want,
values
I
are
want
worth.
to tell you what you said, Josh didn't want to answer the question. What he's kind of did without patting himself on the back, being the savvy business director that he has helped us forecast and guide that if we could put some money into our unfunded liability fund, we can pick up twice as much as we put in there in more aid. So we have worked every angle we can work to maximize our aid every year. And now our backs are to the wall that we have to exceed the revenue limit. We pulled every lever and string that we could pull.
I mean, you either have to ask to exceed your revenue limit, or you have to get a higher allocation on a per pupil basis.
Or a lot more students.
Or more students, I mean, it's
Or
just
higher
math,
revenue-
right?
higher revenue limit.
Yeah.
But if you look at
It's just math.
300 schools plus, that I think, and I credit Suzanne for waking me up to this a couple of months ago, because I was complaining, the system's broken, but I don't know if it is. I think the system might be working exactly the way they want it to work. They want you to go to your local community to get support, that money stays right here. That $1.1 million isn't gonna go to Madison. They're gonna decide after a worksheet that we get 800 of it back. We get every dollar of it. So I think it's a system and the community has to realize this is the way it's set up. Because we're not too far from all of a sudden 90% of the schools utilizing that system.
And I think it ties.
I'm good.
No, yeah, I
it's
think
all
it
right.
does tie back to the bigger piece of local control, though. And you said it earlier, right? Electing who you want on the school board. And our board has always had a philosophy of saying, we believe we want to have local control over decision-making here within the school district versus someone else who's not tied to the community in any way, right? Or big government making those decisions. And so I think it does come back to that and the community making that decision for how do we want our schools to look? How do we want to fund our schools? What kind of schools do we want within our district? So
just one more thing, just related to that equalization aid. So, right, the state issues the numbers or whatever to come back and say, what does Northern Ozaukee get and all the other school districts throughout the state? How does that compare to last year? So, well, this year ours did increase, but again, that's only part of the pie. That doesn't mean that we get that additional funding and we now have that additional extra to spend. Because that doesn't, right, because that doesn't change our revenue limit.
Right.
It just changes how the revenue limit is funded. So
But
there
as
are
a
changes to it. No, from a
But as
taxpayer, yeah, for sure,
taxpayer,
yes.
Right, that lobbying to increase the state piece.
Right.
Toward the, you know.
The percentage.
The percentage, right?
Right.
We want more back from what you send to
I
Madison. We like
understand.
that. Right. I get
Yep.
them. Well, we all send, everybody.
But on that, to speak to that, Chris, again, what Dave said, it's local. If referendum goes through, it's local, instantly local, not through the big Madison filter and back, which is all our money anyways. Right? So all that money that the additional state equalization aid would still be our tax money that goes there, and it wouldn't be a 1-to-1 there and back. Our money's going probably out other districts and not spread evenly is what we could probably assume would be happening when it would reach that.
Every one of the board members are in the same boat, pay taxes as well. We don't have one board member, I
Yeah.
think, don't have property in the community that are paying taxes. So I mean,
Right.
we all feel it. I mean, we're all in the same boat.
All right, excellent. So we're gonna wrap this meeting up. Thank you again for your time. We're gonna end the recording. Just a quick reminder, we have one more informational meeting that's scheduled. So next week, Monday, we have a Facebook Live opportunity. But again, from now until Election Day, if there are additional questions or you run across someone in the community that has some pending questions, please have them contact anyone on the board or Josh or myself. We'd be happy to schedule a phone call or a meeting to discuss those and hopefully make sure everyone has all the information they need to make an informed decision. So thanks again for your time tonight and have a great evening.